Hello and welcome to Vikings Muses, conversations between a man and woman about culture and all the different craziness that we see in the world today. I am Dylan Bain, and I'm joined as always by my co-host.
Hey everyone, I'm Anya Shack.
So I think our topic, our whole goal with this whole show is really just to start having conversations out in the open. And you and I have talked at length about anti-human societies. We just don't talk to each other. And all the different like disconnects and tensions that we have around that. And so kind of the goal, I think, is really to start having the conversation, start modeling the conversation.
I love it. I think that the truth of any topic really lies somewhere in the middle. And
Totally.
so it's just like we always talk about this, the need for nuance, the need for understanding multiple layers and levels of any given topic, and to be able to do so without I don't know, the PC police, and to be able to do so without feeling like you might say something wrong or you might be offensive, is really important. And I really want to kind of facilitate a space like that with what we do here.
100%. And I think just on the top side, like we're gonna get things wrong, and the PC police is a big thing. Like, I've always had people who are like, I'm afraid to say this, and I was like, okay, well, I can be a safe space. What is it that you want to say?
Yeah.
And it's always funny because I feel like you end up in one of two locations at that. Like either people are like, oh yeah, and then suddenly you're having this conversation about this really deep thing, and you
Yeah.
can see somebody like in their fullness really struggling to understand or to grapple with this thing, and now you get an insight into their real world or their inner world. Or the other side is that they really just want to say something really awful, and they want to do so without consequences. And I always think I always have
Mhm.
to laugh because I think that that's such an interesting dynamic. And I
Yeah.
don't necessarily have a sense of chill, so I'm always willing to go to the mat on these
Yeah.
things.
I hear you. And you know what? I find that usually it's just a little bit of ignorance or a little bit of lack of experience that is the reason for someone saying something that might be offensive to someone else. Um, Great example. So, just this is something that I've been thinking about recently. The show Beef. Have you watched the show Beef on
I,
Netflix
I
yet?
have not, but I know the premise, and like
Okay,
I watch shows one at a time, so like
love
it's
it.
on the list.
Okay, so I watched Beef, and after watching Beef, I found myself like attracted to the main character, Stephen Wynn, I think is his name. Anyway, and since Crazy Rich Asians came out however many years ago, and all of just these like films and TV shows that are featuring more and more Asian lead roles, it's like such a wonderful thing for our society and our culture. And I found myself like more and more attracted to Asian men recently, and most of my life I've never thought of that ever. Like I've just never, it's never crossed my mind. And I realize it's just because I wasn't interacting with that. I wasn't shown that. It wasn't something that was part of my life. And so it's the same thing with like racism. I was talking to another friend about this. It's like most people say racist things just because they don't know, not because they're hateful. And I
Hmm.
think like they haven't had experiences with people of different races and cultures. And so they'll just say things offhand, with no real malicious intent. And that's kind of like the first thing you were talking about, which is like this really deep kind of like emotive moment as opposed to being hateful and malicious. So that was a great example of that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting because you talk and like one of the arguments I think with like, oh, you're seeing more Asian men, and now suddenly you're more attracted to Asian men,
Right.
and that I can almost hear people be like, oh, see, representation matters, and it's like, well, yeah, of course it does, but it's not a double edged sword,
Right.
and this is one of these things that so like I grew up south of Milwaukee. And when I turned 18, I went to school in Milwaukee, lived there for a number of years. It is the second most segregated city in the United States.
Hmm.
And so racial issues are something that we run into quite a bit. And I had somebody ask me one time and say, like, well, would you date a black woman?
Mm.
And I was like, I don't see any reason why I wouldn't.
Right.
And I just happened to be sitting at a table where there was a black woman, and she says, I don't date white guys. And I was like, okay, well, so like now suddenly I'm in this thing of like, oh, I've never experienced this before. I want to have the conversation. How do I have that conversation?
Ooh,
Because
yeah.
on the one hand, I want to be I'm very curious because the question I want to ask is, well, if I said I just wouldn't date somebody who wasn't of the same ethnicity of me, is that racist inherently? And if it is what she just said racist, right?
Such a good
And that's
question.
hard because we do live in this multicultural world, in particularly when you're spending time with people.
Mm.
And what was the irony of that particular situation is I actually did date that woman. We ended
Oh
up
my God.
dating for a little while. And again, like there was just so many different conversations that we had about going to restaurants or different scenarios and situations like at the art museum and how she felt we were being treated versus how I saw it. And really going in with empathy was my way in.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there was a lot of anger on the other side. Like I didn't feel like that flowed in reasonable on a lot of levels,
Sure.
but it still is a hard conversation.
Ooh, it's such a hard conversation because then you can ask, like, I don't know, a Hasidic Jew, like, would you date a black person? And it's like, well, if they're a Hasidic Jew, but like most black folks aren't Hasidic Jews. So it's like an interesting layer there. It's totally based on like my cultural and familial context of why I wouldn't date somebody. And so for some reason that's not racist because it's about my like my religion in a way. So it's interesting.
Well, but it comes down to a question. I mean, to me, the fundamental question with attraction
Yeah.
is: are there boundaries? Like, can you have an exclusive society, and is that okay? And under what circumstances is it?
Mm,
Right.
yeah.
So, like if you say something, along the lines of like, well, I'm a Hasidic Jew, and this is my culture, and so I stay very insulated to that. Is there a racial element, or is that them just creating an affinity group? I think is the term that they
Right.
use for it.
Right.
And so if it's just an affinity group and we're okay with that in the one context, are we okay with it in every context? And if we're not, why?
Yeah.
And this is where I think these conversations really get off track
Yeah.
because now suddenly we realize that it's kind of uncomfortable.
Totally.
It's uncomfortable to say, no, there are exclusionary zones. Somewhere in
Totally.
life, somehow in life, there's exclusionary zones.
Two of the most important exclusionary zones are the zones of men and women, right?
Totally.
Yeah. I was thinking recently about just like how just men and their level of competition with each other. And so this is something that I've been thinking about in relationship and in friendships and this idea that when a woman in relationship all she wants to do is fight and she wants to like lead and be the one with all the rules and just be the one leading, at some point it's almost like the two, I don't know, the two heads butting up against each other or something. And it's like at some point a man is going to just say, okay, like back down and just say, well, I'm not going to fight you. You're a woman. And that right there seems to be like the first rule in exclusionary zones. It's like something changes when a woman comes into the picture. Something changes when a woman gets into a circle of men. It's suddenly different than the competitive nature and the hierarchy and the one-upping each other that happens when it's just men. And I think that's a really fascinating thing to kind of start talking about because it's probably why there's so much tension within homes, of course, but also the workplace. And I'm so curious to talk about this.
Yeah. We're just going to go on the real light topics for the first
Of
episode.
course.
Um,
Classic. I can't
yeah.
do light. Oh, God, I try so hard to do light things and I just can't do it.
Me either. Me either. People are always like, well, you could always start with small talk. And I was like, how do you do that? Like to me, small
Literally.
talk is like let's discuss recent legislative action around abortion. Like let's just figure out where we all stand real quick, and then let's mix it up because it's fun.
That's why you're my
Um,
soul family, Dylan. Yes.
I mean, sometimes conflict is connection.
Yep.
So like with men's spaces, it's interesting because I'm a little like I feel like in terms of like the arc of our gender story as a nation. I'm older, so like I can remember some male exclusionary spaces where women were starting to say like, well, no, I should be in this. And the argument of like, I don't think you want to be in this. Like specifically working out on hay crews, when you're pulling in hay off the field. Like we're out there busting our ass in the sun, on a tractor that's throwing hay bales at you, or you're up in the mow stacking hay bales, and there was friendly competition, right? Like there was friendly competition between the tractor crews and the barn crews, and all that stuff. And then we started having women saying like, well, we want to come out there. And my whole thing was like, can you throw a hay bale with one arm? Because if you can't, how would you possibly keep up? And they're like, well, we'll think of different ways to do it. And so eventually women came out there, but that changed the whole dynamic. And I've thought about that a lot in terms of like, does a woman have a right to be out there? Well, of course. I don't think that there's any reason I would say she shouldn't. But it does change the dynamics because now instead of seeking status among the men, which was one game, now we're showing off for the sole woman, which is a different game.
Right.
So instead of competing to figure out what our hierarchy is, we're now competing against each other for a prize. And the argument would say like, oh, well, she shouldn't be a prize. Yeah, I get that. But 3 million years of human evolution tells me otherwise. And there's only so much of my neurocircuitry I can override, especially when you're 18 years old and throwing hay bales. Like,
Totally.
It's a high testosterone environment.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's really interesting that you just share it like that, because I can think of it right away on the flip side. I was building a cabin with some friends last weekend, and 2 women and 2 other men and a dog and me, and it was very fun. And then there were a couple of moments where I was sharing about the women's group that I'm in with some of the women, and there was a beautiful lesson on erectile tissue, essentially. Erectile tissue in a woman's body. Okay?
Okay.
It was fascinating. It was a lot of new information that I didn't know, and I was super excited to share this with my female friends. Okay? These 2 women who I like talk to, and they love me. I know them. And I had mentioned to one of them that I would share about this lesson with them later. And then the men had come up to the space. So now we were all sitting together, and she was like, hey, why don't you tell us about it now? And literally my body was it was such a strong reaction that I was like, I definitely can't talk about this right now. Like, I'll share it with you, like, when it's just us. I can't talk about this with men around, with men that like I don't know on like a personal level in that way. And it was so just like guttural and visceral for me. And I think it's because like we're, as women, are the gatekeepers to sex. And so conversations around sex is like very much in women's spaces when it's that specific. And it just felt like I was like, I don't know how to explain it. It just felt wrong. It just felt wrong to share in that space. And I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I think it's because of this exclusionary zone.
Totally. Well, I also think it's so, and I'm not a woman who has erectile tissues. I'm a man who has erectile tissues.
Exactly.
But like, you can go look at those on the internet if you really want to. The thing about it for me though is like you're exploring parts of your body. Yeah. Like there's an exploration. Like what role does a man have in a woman exploring her own body? Totally. I don't think I do. Like totally. I need to learn a woman's body, sure. Right? Like especially with sexual partners or intimate liaisons. I should know my way around, and I should know how to read her so that I can maintain the safety she needs to be open. And like when like the first conversation is about what is a period, like I don't think I have a role there outside of certain circumstances, right? Like if something were to happen to my wife and I'd have to have that conversation with my daughters, right. Ready, willing, and able to do it. And when it happens, because it's only a few years away for me, yeah, I will be like, if my daughter comes to me, it'd be like, well, we're gonna call mom and we're gonna bring her in here, not because I'm uncomfortable with it, but because sure. I don't have the experience to talk about it. When I can't sit there and look her in the eye and be like, oh, I remember how scary this was, like because I don't. So I feel like there's that, and the other side is like I don't think, and I've never been in a women's group, but I don't think
Yeah.
women break the ice with dick jokes. And as soon as you start talking about erectile tissue, there's going to be a dick joke.
Oh my God, not in a women's group. No way. We all start crying
Exactly.
automatically. Yeah.
Whereas I have literally been in men's groups where it's like we've had this really hard conversation about father wounds
Yeah.
and like abuse, physical,
Yeah.
sexual, and like then there's a dick joke and it breaks the ice unless it's just transitionary. I don't think women interact that way.
No, not at all. It's so funny. Oh my God. Not at all. Oh my gosh. It's just so insane. We talk about so many other things, and it's just way more serious than that. And I love what you said about um, a, a little girl, a girl's mother, or another woman, if her mother's not available, being the place of safety and the thing that she really needs when it comes to the period. And I want to pull this up because I recently read this like great article. Rihanna, I'm going to quote Rihanna because I just love pop culture and I think it's just so important to like to talk about it a little bit in the moment. So Rocky and Rihanna, their first son, she was saying here in this Elle interview, basically, she said something like, Rocky has his son who he's so close to. Even Rihanna's a little jealous. She says, I'm just sitting on the sidelines when they're together. I'm literally the girl trying to get into the boys' club. He's obsessed with his dad. And I'm like, didn't I give birth to you? What's going on? And the second Rocky makes eye contact with him, he's on fire. The whole thing they say about sons and moms is a big myth. Sons and fathers is crazy. I realize that the validation you really need as a boy is from your father.
100%.
Just so
100%.
profound. Yeah.
I mean, in the book Iron John, and we should come back to your women's circle here in a second. But
Yeah.
there's like the start of the mythopoetic men's movement was the book Iron John, which is on the shelf right behind me. And one of the things that Robert Bly said is that if you have a young man in your life and you're not telling him you're proud of him, you are actively damaging him. It's not that it's passive. It's not that it's neutral. It is active harm. And like in men's groups, and I there are things I say to men in men's groups that I could never say in the presence of women because the context would be different.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm very clear in saying is telling young men that I mentor that A, I love you, and yes,
Yeah.
I use those words, and I'm proud of you. You know, and I have had men who are older than me, but I'm still mentoring them, literally burst into tears because that was the first time in their life they ever heard it.
Feel that. Feel
Totally.
that so deeply. It's just so important. Wow. Yeah, I can see that. I can see that to be so true. And it's like there's so many. I just see there's so many boys walking around in adult bodies with bank accounts and
Totally.
fast cars and all the things, and they're still just they just have this like void where they didn't get told that. So I think they have this belief about themselves that they're not good, they're not good enough, they're not worth it, they're just not good enough. And it's all stemming back from what you're talking about from dad.
100%. I mean, going back to the period side, like one of the things that Robert Bly pointed out was that for women, there's a biological marker of the transition from girl to woman.
Yep.
You are now capable of life. Like,
Yeah.
congratulations, you're part of the club. And I think that, women need to be honest about that.
Yeah.
Women's cycles, like there's a reason that we view the moon as feminine, right? Like women's cycles, there is a cycle.
Totally.
There's cycles for guys too, but they're radically different.
Yeah.
But for boys becoming men, there isn't. We don't have that biologically. That's always culturally enforced.
Yeah.
And without it, like if boys are raised without love, they'll burn the village down to feel warmth.
Yeah.
Like, and that is exactly what happens. In our modern context, I don't think that actually happens anymore. I think that they just fall into a void of porn, weed, and video games. And then they become unambitious and they turn around, they're 30, and now they're, in my men's group going, I don't know how to be a man. And that's where I find a lot of people.
Totally.
But it's huge.
Totally.
But take me back to wanting to have a female conversation and there are men there, and how, like, what was the truth for you in that situation?
Well, the truth was, um, I I think it was just I'm embarrassed to talk about this in front of you.
Hmm.
I think that was the initial thing. I'm embarrassed, so I think that was partly conditioning. Um, I also think this is a sacred conversation. Exactly
Mm.
like you said, this is a sacred conversation about exploring my body and new things that I'm learning about myself, such that I can be a more fully expressed woman, such that I can be all that I am, comfortable in my skin, and all of these things to attract the type of man, or not even the type of man, but the man that I want to be with and like fall in love with and be with for the rest of my life. Like that is the desire. The desire is not multiple men. The desire is not different men hearing me talking about sex. The desire is one specific man that is going to be privy to all of that information, and no one else should be privy to it.
Mm.
It's very
So that,
sacred.
yeah, yeah. So I feel like we're touching on almost a Judeo-Christian uh, obsession's not the right word. Maybe fetishization of virginity. Like
Mm,
the idea. Because I remember I went K through grad school in Catholic school,
yeah.
so I know a little bit about Catholicism. I
Yep.
did at one point in my life want to be a priest.
Yep.
So they used to say that like a woman's body should be a complete mystery that's revealed on the wedding night. Like that
Ugh,
should be secret knowledge you have.
right.
Now, I don't think that's a healthy way to look at it. Like to be
Mm-mm.
100% clear, but it is interesting to hear you say of like, well, no, there is actually supposed to be a mystery here. Like there should be
Yeah.
some sort of uncovering. I would love to explore that more.
You know what's interesting? So exactly, it's funny how you heard it the way that it kind of came out, where it went straight to virginity and this kind of like space, which is what I actually think is probably the biggest problem in our society. One of the biggest problems is that we have this or that mindset around sexuality, where you're either a whore or it's the Madonna, where it's like completely maternal, completely nurturing, and almost asexual in a way.
Mm.
And what I'm getting at is the exact like opposite of both of those things. It's like what we said before, like the truth is found somewhere in the middle. And so
Hmm.
this idea of like, sure, buying into the whole notion that like sex is free, sex is great, like sleeping with different people in my 20s, like in college. And then now just speaking like bluntly, like I'm in this like celibacy journey, and I've been in that for about a year and a half. And it is very profound. And I'm feeling so alive in it, because what it's just helping me do is realize that I I'm responsible for my own sexuality. I'm responsible to know
Hmm.
exactly what my body wants and needs and what it's like and the different parts of it, and I'm I'm responsible to know all of that information. And I think that a man is responsible to know all of that information about himself.
Hmm. Totally. And very few of us do.
Right. And then when two people come together and then sex becomes something sacred. Like it just does. And I just feel like completely judgment free on sleeping around and like however people want to do that. That's totally fine. I understand. But I think for me personally, this whole celibacy journey is showing me that that's not what I'm interested in.
Hmm.
I'm interested in being able to completely express and give and, I don't know, unearth all of the juicy aspects of sexuality to this one person, as opposed to when I was sleeping around in my early 20s, I didn't know anything. So it was like
Totally.
I was having sex and I none of this information was there. So it was just almost like chi-less sex, if you will.
Mm. Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
Chi is in the energetic charge that goes with it.
Yep,
It's just a
exactly.
biological imperative. I mean, it's interesting because, like, there's a fine line between I'm not going to tell people how to live their life. Like the guy who's living in his mom's basement, smoking pot and playing video games. Like
Totally.
like, I'm not going to sit here and be like, bro, like, stop it. But at the same time, if you were to ask me, do you think that this is okay? I would say no.
Yeah.
Right? Like, because there's no intentionality there. There's no guidance for self leadership. There's no
Yep.
sovereignty. There's no
Yep.
safety for anyone in that situation.
Mm,
That man is not a safe person, right? Like,
mm,
there's so while at the same on the one hand, where I won't tell them no, how to live their life. On the other hand, I'm not going to sit there and say I think that's okay, because I don't. And the same thing is true with sex. Like, I don't I don't think that sleeping around is ever really a great idea, mostly because I believe it's something we should be responsible with, right? Like,
totally.
sex is never free.
Totally.
At least it never has been for me.
Totally.
There's always something. There's a give and a take, and I think once we start saying, like, no, sex should be free, it's a free activity, like, we separate our humanity, and anytime we do that with anything, food, transportation, song, dance,
Yeah.
sex, that's where I think the problem comes in, right?
Mm,
When there's a lack of intentionality, when there's a lack of understanding, and there's a lack of responsibility. And,
right.
and this is true for men too. It's not just women.
Yeah.
Like,
Totally.
I would, like, if a young guy was like, "Yeah, I'm sleeping around a lot," I'd be like, aren't you proud of me, Dylan?" No, I'm not. Like,
Right.
you're
Right.
not being responsible. You're not being respectful of yourself. You're not being respectful of her. You're not being respectful of your position. And
Totally.
you touched on it of, like, women are the gatekeepers of sex. Well,
Yeah.
with power, because that's power, comes
Yeah.
responsibility.
Yeah.
Men are physically stronger. There's power, and with power comes responsibility.
So how do you get around this is something I've been pondering for a little while. How do you get around like the young guy who's maybe 18 years old who realizes like, all right, it's time to stop smoking weed and just like sitting on the couch, and he starts getting after it, right? He starts going to the gym, he starts figuring out what he wants to do. Maybe he goes to a technical college, maybe
Mm-hmm.
he just starts on that journey, and he knows he's not ready to meet her, like quote unquote her, and settle down yet. But he still has this obviously big sexual drive, sexual urge. He is, I guess, not looking to watch porn, so he's really like on his journey. How does a young guy that's not ready for commitment like deal with this whole idea of like, why wouldn't it be a bad idea to sleep around for a few years? I'm curious what you think.
Yeah. There's a lot of different ways to go with that.
Yeah.
Because young men, like, I think one of the first stops when young men start going, oh, I actually want to have a relationship.
Mm.
They either find their way into Red Pill, which is its own rescue operation, or they find like NoFap, and they're like, like, let's do this. And it was like, no, wait, stop, breathe, it'll be fine. Like, there's an energetic difference between, like, I'm gonna go monk mode, NoFap. Like, the whole NoFap thing seems to be much more about, and this is like secession of masturbation and porn use entirely.
Right.
So to me, that seems to be like, we've realized porn is bad, and we've linked porn to masturbation, and I don't think those are linked. I think we link them,
Mm.
but I think they're separate things, right? Because,
Mm.
like, how is a man supposed to learn about his body if he's not using it?
Mm.
Like, it's the same thing with
Fascinating.
women. Like, how do women learn? I actually don't know. So, but, like, I assume it's the same thing, because I've been
Yeah.
with women where it's like, you know, they're like, "Oh, you're the guy. You're responsible for sexual performance. I did not having a great time. Fix me." And it's like,
Oh,
I
wow.
have no idea how to do this. Like, I know my way around,
Oh my
and for
gosh.
the most part, I'm highly successful. But every once in a while, it's just like, I don't know what to do with you, because you don't know what to do with you. And it's the
That's
same
it.
thing with men too, right? So I don't think that necessitates a hoe
Hmm.
phase, for lack of a better term. But I do think it necessitates, like, I'm not ready for the one, but I am
Yeah.
ready to date. Like, I am ready to go
Yeah.
out and date, and be able to say, like, hey, I want to sleep with you. I'm not really looking for, like, I'm not marriage, but I would like to have some exclusivity. I'd like to explore this with you. Like,
Totally.
that's a bigger difference, right?
Yeah.
And that was what it was like for me, right? Like, of to say, like, I'm not interested in getting married, but, like, we get along, we have a lot of the same interests, so for this time being, let's just run in parallel and be exclusive
Yeah.
to each other, and really take the time to learn this and experiment.
Yeah.
You know, that was
Mm.
my journey, and that gave me a great in depth of a lot of things sexually, both for myself and for
Mm.
her. But then also to say, like, all the cards were on the table, and when it was time to move on, we just moved on. Right?
That's so fascinating. I love hearing that. And I've heard stories like that from different men. It was just not like that for me. Like it was just not like that for me, interestingly enough. And I also always like I feel like I always this is my experience, right? I'm coming from some like anxious attached, abandonment wounds, really finding attraction in men that were unavailable like for me, right? And I think
Totally.
that's where I've come from. And so what I've also realized is so many of the men that I dated during those times like weren't that forthright and weren't that forthcoming about the situation and like what they were looking for, because I don't think they knew themselves. Like mirrors attract mirrors. I was attracting somebody that was just as clueless as I was. And so I think what ended up happening was they like would go and date somebody after me, and I would see it and I would find out about it, and I was just devastated in the moment. And what I think they were doing, and this is kind of me now reflecting, was they were not ready for the one, but they were ready for a practice girlfriend. Mm-hmm. And I think I was a little bit too emotionally intense to be anybody's practice girlfriend.
Totally.
And that's literally my assessment of the situation. And so I was so devastated, but I now realize like that was what was happening.
Totally. I mean, so like I make it sound idyllic, but like I also started late because there was a period of time where I wanted to be a priest, right? Like so.
Oh yeah.
Like
right.
there were a lot of interactions that were not healthy, and then
Yeah.
by the time like I was fortunate that I was engaged before very early on, because when I decided like, oh, the priesthood isn't for me, because I found a woman. And it was highly Catholic relationship, and like that, it was horrible. Like attachment issues all over the place, a lot of codependence, no boundaries, absolute supernova detonation of an end to the relationship on both sides. It was at that point where I was like, "Yep, I'm done. I'm no longer Christian," and I never went back. So that was a huge turning point in my life. But I was very fortunate to have somebody in my circle who was older than her years, to be able to say, hey, like part of the problem here is that you're having these issues, and I'm willing to walk through them with you, but only for about a month or so. And we did, and that helped me through that. Now like like she's much more emancipated than I was.
Right.
But it also taught me how to have I never knew how to have the conversation until she had it with me. And I was able to have that conversation. And then later, like, as I progressed through this, of to say, like, this is just what this is.
Yeah.
Right? This is what this is. This is how we're going to do this. And that's where a lot of the sexual education for me really came. But it was for me, it was much later in life.
Totally makes sense. I love that. And I think, it's all about just honesty and, eventually coming to a place which I think most women, I'm not going to speak for all women, but I'd say most women that have like a feminine core are yearning to be chosen and to be committed to, in the same way that like when you ask Winston Churchill, when they did some interviews and they asked Winston Churchill, like, what was his secret to success? And his answer was always, I love my wife. I don't chase women. I got married and I'm set. Like I use the rest of my brain space on like important things. And so I think all women are just like, oh my God, I want that. I want to be chosen and just like seen as a partner in that way,
Yeah. Well, I think, Jordan B. Peterson talks about this a lot. Like the first lie we tell women is that their career is the most important thing in their life. And the second thing we tell women is that their career will always be the most important thing in their life.
Fuck yeah.
And like, it's just interesting to me because, so if you, my wife has her PhD.
Yeah.
The woman before her has her PhD in world languages. And the woman before her has her PhD in neurobiology. And the woman before her has her PhD in anthropology. I have a type. And it's typically women who are smarter than me, right?
Yeah.
So like if it's if I'm not challenged intellectually, spiritually, and energetically, it's not fun for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
So like but looking at that and feeling that all of so many of those women, like, either they got married to the next person they dated after me, or they didn't get married
Mm.
at all and went and chased a career. And it's
Mm.
interesting to see which ones, like one of my ex-girlfriends, she got a master's degree in aeronautical engineering from Ohio State.
Wow.
And then she met her husband, and she was like, "Nope, I'm a stay-at-home mom." But she's happier
Totally.
for it. Like,
Totally.
she and I've asked her. I was like, "Well, what is it like for you?" And she talks about, feeling like, she was abandoning people, and that the world needed her as a woman in this position of power, blah blah blah. And then she's like, "But what was true for me was to have kids and raise them, so that's what I'm doing."
Feel that.
And the woman who shepherded me through my dark time, she did 10 years as a high powered consultant, made tons of money, and then, like, she once she hit her number, she retired and got married and now has like 8 kids on a farm in Indiana. Like,
This is amazing. Yeah.
so like
Totally.
there's this evolution that goes through that. So it's not that I've been around non-career oriented women, I guess, is the point of my story.
Yeah.
It's that
Exactly.
these things change. Like, what we're sold a bill of goods that was ideologically driven and economically useful, but
Yeah.
it's not true on a human level.
It's not true. It's just so not true. One of the people that I'm closest with nowadays is a friend of mine who I actually went to high school with. We both went to the East Coast for college. I went to New York. She went to Tufts in Boston. She ended up becoming kind of religious with Orthodox Christianity, and she met her husband at her church. She is now there, like, on a farm situation in in rural Maine, and she just had her fifth kid, and she stayed at home mom, homeschooling her kids. This woman, I remember when we left high school, she was like, "I'm going to be the I'm going to be a diplomat, and I'm going to be like an American diplomat for France," because she had been learning French and all these things. And then now she's a stay-at-home mom, and she's so happy, and we connect now because we both have this, like, inner knowing about this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so beautiful to be connected to her in that way. And I think that, whew, I think that women don't I think that women don't understand how much power they have in a
Totally.
completely different way than what they think their power should look like.
Oh yeah. Well, but they've been told their power should look like a man.
Totally. Yeah.
Like that's the thing. And like, I work in corporate. I work in corporate finance. I interact with the C-suite a lot. And it's interesting when I can see women who are stuck at the director level and women who have ascended. The women stuck at the director level are trying to be like one of the boys, and they feel
Oh.
false, but they can't
Oh.
advance their career because they can't lead anybody because it feels
Oh.
false. It feels threatening. But like, and I
Mm.
when I sit with some of the SVPs who are also women, right? These are the highest powered women in the company, Fortune 100
Yeah.
company. They lead from the feminine. And
Cool.
like, I would follow them into the depths of hell. Like, but it's very different than the men who are at the same level of the org chart. So like,
Yeah.
there is, it's not that I'm saying that women can't lead. They absolutely
Yeah.
can. But there's
Yeah.
something so true and so nourishing to me as a man when a woman
Yeah.
leads from her feminine. And like, I'll totally follow it. Right?
What is it? Like, what are those things, what are those attributes about those women at the top?
So, and the one I think of very specifically, like, she's never shy to talk about her kids,
Yeah.
right? She talks
Yeah.
about her kids. She'll interact. She remembers my kids. Like, when I
Yeah.
talk to men, like, they're like, "Hello, Dylan, how's it going?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's great." And he was like, "All right, we got to talk about this thing." Whereas the women
Totally.
are always just like, "How's Agatha doing?" My youngest
Totally.
daughter. And it's like, it's very much of the, like, oh, this person's creating this community. This person is like, there isn't a hierarchy. She's creating consensus. She's creating a one team, one dream thing that's more collective. Like, you can buy
Mm.
into what they're telling you, and it's really
Mm.
powerful to experience.
Oh
Whereas
yeah.
some of the more successful leader men are more of the guys who they're like the standard bearers. They got the flag and they're like, we're going to go take the hill. And you're like, yeah, it's a different feel, but one's not wrong and one's not right. They
Yeah.
both get the job done.
Yeah. Wow. So cool. You know, I one of the things I've been learning that I think is so profound is by speaking their truth in the moment, women call men into a deeper version of themselves. So
I'm here for
this is,
that.
yeah, so this is something I've been learning, and what's fascinating and why I think, men ask this question a lot. They've asked me this question a lot, and it's just so interesting. They ask, like, why do women never do what they say they're going to do, or why do women always say something different than what they mean? Why is it always confusing? And the answer is simply that women are told to push down their truth, and what's happening is you're being told not truth, and then the truth comes out sideways later.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it comes out as a sucker punch.
Totally, it comes out as emasculation, nagging, criticism, all the nasty things that are meant to make the man feel small. When the only reason she's doing it is because she already feels small because she didn't speak her truth. And
Totally.
so it's this is probably the biggest lesson to femininity in my life right now. This is like the biggest lesson. And one of my coaches said something beautiful. She was like, if you hold back your truth, you're literally cock blocking his hero's journey.
Totally.
And it's funny how you're like totally, but like women are all in this belief system that men don't want us to speak our truth.
Oh, no, 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 no.
Isn't
Well,
that wild, though?
the thing I'll say on this though is that like I'm a little further down the journey than some guys.
Yeah, true.
Like I'm okay with sitting with the feminine at this point in my life. I haven't always been,
True.
right? But like
True.
women are told that society expects them to be meek and everything. Like I've been hearing that my whole life.
Totally.
And it's like, wait, but like we've made a lot of progress in the last 40, 50, 60 years. Like
Yeah.
it clearly has changed. Like just look at
Yeah.
how look at any statistics on economic achievement, degrees,
Yeah.
education, healthcare, all that stuff. Women are they're winning, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I think women are told that they're supposed to feel that way, like because it's very useful for ideology to make you feel like you're
Yeah.
oppressed. And at the
Yeah.
same time, I would like when woman is just in her truth and be like, I really feel this way. I mean, title of this podcast, great example. You were like, I want Vikings Muses. Okay, cool. If that's your knowing, I'm all in. That was the that was the end for me.
Yeah.
I don't have to
Yeah.
question it further because it's like, oh, she knows, she feels something I'm not attuned to, and I trust that. But I haven't always. But what I have
Okay.
learned is that like true connection, contact, and intimacy can't exist from a kabuki theater.
Oof.
Like you
So
can't
good.
have the big love from like if a woman just wants protection, she can never be hugged because she's behind the wall.
Oh,
But when
that
she's
makes so
fully
much
open and she's just this is the truth. This is the thing. The resonant ring of that is so clear for what I'm supposed to do to be the hero. I
Yeah.
know what dragon to slay. Which makes me safer because I have a direction. I'm not going to flail about running around trying to make somebody happy who doesn't know what they want.
Which makes you feel closer to her, and then you're deepening your own connection with your own emotions because she's awakening emotional something in you.
Totally.
And this is a huge one. Like, you guys listening to this, this is okay. I'm going to give an example of like me that wasn't in touch with this feminine truth thing and like what I would have said in a situation versus what I would say now and the difference. And so for like me 10 years ago, okay, if a man that I was dating was like an hour late to something, okay, I would be deeply upset and deeply hurt and just like so feeling all the feels. I was just I probably would start crying at that moment in my life just because I was so not aware of like the anxious attached and the abandonment and the rejection wounds and all of that I felt all was coming up in my body. And I would feel all of that. But then when he would show up, sorry I'm late, I'd be like, oh, it's totally cool. No big deal.
It's not cool.
This is literally what I would do, because I even grew up hearing like, don't share your emotions with men. They don't want them. They can't take them. They're whatever, all of that stuff. And I wanted to be the cool girl, and I thought that would make men like me more. And I thought that it was what I should do. And this is the kind of narrative we're given as women. And I literally just a few years ago started learning that the exact opposite is true in life. I never got any of those guys to want to choose me when I pulled that shit.
They don't respect you.
Totally.
Like there's like you, like this is gonna sound really sexist, but just bear with me here for a second.
Yeah.
You're no longer a prize.
Yeah.
Like, you're no longer the prize. You don't respect yourself enough for me to earn anything.
Oh my God.
Like, if I, like, first off, as a man, I would be mortified to be late to a date or anything. Like, me personally.
None of
like,
the men I ever interacted with would be mortified.
But like, my self-worth is a man of my word. If I say 7 o'clock, 7 o'clock.
Yeah.
You know, and if I better have a good fucking excuse as to why I'm late. Right? Like, because it's my respect to her. If I don't show up on time, I am communicating that I view my time as more valuable than hers. And if from my standpoint, if you know, as your friend, to say like, he's not respecting you, and you should tell him, because this is the thing, men ascend to wherever women set the bar.
Yeah.
So if he shows up an hour late and you say, I waited here because you need to know just how unbelievably disrespectful you are, and I have lost complete and utter respect for you. Do better. And then you walk away. Like, one of two things is going to happen. He's either going to be like, that bitch, or he's going to be like completely crushed and like, you know, devastated, and he's going to call his buddies, and if he has good men around him, they're going to be like, yeah, she's got a point. Yeah. But when you fold, you're saying, I don't even value myself, and it's okay.
Totally.
My lack of boundaries, my lack of value, that's what I think is valuable to you. And it's not respectful to me either.
It's like, yeah, your time is more valuable than mine, is literally what I'm communicating with that. And so devastating. And also, like, I love what you just said, because so many of the women that, like, you know, are in my space and that listen to the things that I share are also coming from rejection and abandonment wounds and not enoughness wounds and all of that. And so to hear a man say, I would never be late because I value myself too much, the big kicker is like, all the men that I've interacted with during those years, like, never valued themselves either. So of course we were attracting each other. It was two people that were not valuing each other or not valuing themselves.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
yeah.
And then they're building their value in the other person, which is enmeshment. And, you know, this is a carousel of horrors.
Totally.
But it's funny because these are family things, right? Like in my wife's family, they always are like, oh yeah, like, we're gonna show up at 5 o'clock, and they're actually planning for like 6:30. Well, when I came into the family, they have a name for it, right? You know, they call it George time. You know, everyone's on George time, and so it's like this joke. When I came into the family, they're like, well, we're gonna start at 5 o'clock, and so I got ready. I was ready to go. My wife's like, well, where are you going? I was like, we are going to show up at 5 o'clock because they told us. So I showed up, and they were like, what the hell are you doing here? And I was like, you said 5. And I took that seriously. So now, like, years later, they're like, oh yeah, we're going to start at 5, except for Dylan. You're not allowed to show up till 6:30. They tell me the actual time because I'll show up at 6:30. I remember my mother-in-law just being like, why do you do that? It's so rude. And I was like, your whole family's rude. Like, you should respect yourself enough to show up on time. You know, plan, you know, and especially for a date, like, show up 15 minutes early, spend some time in the car, and really, like, go through what you expect out of the night, what you want. what you're going,
Yeah.
what you're there for. Are you there just to meet somebody? Are you there because you're hoping to bring her home? Like, what's the goal? What's the sales pitch? What are you presenting? Like, I mean, I even do
Mm,
this with work meetings where I'm like, I'll get to the conference room 15 minutes early just to, get used to the space, be ready. So when they show up, I'm there fully.
totally. I love it. I think
You
that's such
know,
great advice. Such great advice. And I just, oh, like, it's so wild how long it took me to get this lesson. But today, I would very much say, I am so hurt. Like, I am so hurt that you are late because it is. It's painful. It's hurtful. It's it's a lot. And I think that's where the whole I don't want to be too much thing comes
hmm
up for women. And I think getting past that is a big part of women's work is to just own what it is that's coming up and to express it is a huge one. Yeah.
well, let's just play this one out. So for
Yeah.
the men that are listening, I'm going to lay on you some wisdom, and for the women who
Woo!
are listening, this is what you want your male partner to listen to. If he shows up late and you say, "This hurts me," the response should be, "I acknowledge I hurt you, and I am very sorry, and I'm going to take active steps to make sure that never happens again." And then you had better be a man of your word and do it, because you are the one who did the breach. Do not defend yourself. Don't give her excuses. Just say you're sorry and that you're going to be better because you see what you've done and it's never going to happen again. That's repair. And that's how relationships survive. Like, if you can't repair, then it doesn't matter. And so, like, am I going to be like, I am militant about being on time for things, and I'm
Yeah,
still late from time to time.
totally.
And the very first thing that comes out of my mouth when I walk in is like, I am late, I have no excuse, and I am sorry, and it will not happen again.
I love that. And for the women also listening, what when Dylan was just speaking, what really occurred to me was by sharing our truth in that way and by saying I was hurt, like I'm really hurt, what you're actually saying to him is like he matters to you. Like you were really excited about him. He's not just some guy. He's not just whatever. Like this guy matters to you. And he's affecting you. He affects you like deeply in your soul and your heart to the point of tears or to the point of emotion in that way. And that's really important for a man to hear because I think men suffer like worthiness issues a lot.
Oh,
This
yeah.
idea of like men don't matter. So I think for a man to even hear that, it's like forget about how vulnerable it might be for you to put yourself out there like that. That's part of it. But the other part is how much of a gift it is for him to hear it.
Totally. I think the rebuttal that a lot of more feminist orientated people would have would be like, well, I don't want to say this to a man because he could be violent. And my
Mm,
question would be, why are you on a date with him in the first place then?
totally.
Like that shouldn't be a thing. But even you just saying that, like, that's hard for me to even hear. Because like it's one of the things with like there's that whole thing of like, would you talk to a woman if she talked to you first? Man, I talk to a tree if it talked to me first. Like, I can count on one hand the number of compliments from that I've ever received. Like, and
Yeah.
it's very hard when people are like, "Oh, I like that shirt." I immediately like, "Oh my god!" Like, like it's so unusual
I
to
know.
have someone like tell me I'm valuable that it's
I know.
almost threatening. It's not threatening, to be clear, but like it feels that way because it's so unusual.
Mm,
And you hit it right in the head. You're telling the man that he matters, and an immature man is not going to be able to handle that. But a
well,
mature man will take the time to be like, "Oh, I matter. I'm not living up to what I need to be in the situation, and now I need to do better."
ugh, it just makes so much sense to me. It just all like highlights like some of the dating experiences I've had in my past. Like some of the like this one man that I can recall just right away is someone that I dated, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. And I would always, I don't know, I would always try to let him know how important he was. And he couldn't take it. His sense of self worth was just so minimal that, like, he pushed me away so much. And at that time, a man pushing me away was like the sexiest thing ever. But now it's not. And so he pushed me away so much that I can now understand it wasn't that he wasn't interested in me. It was that he couldn't take the pressure of having to live up to someone that's important.
Totally. I mean, with all the men and young men that I mentor, and I'm like, hey, that was really cool. They're like, oh, well, blah, blah. I was like, no, stop, stop, stop. The words you're looking for is, you're right, thank you.
Exactly.
And they're like, I don't want to say that. I was like, well, now you really have to say it.
Oof.
So, and that is the fuck you, Dylan. Love you, Dylan. Like, that's where I get
Yeah.
that. Because they
Yeah.
need to. When somebody gives you a compliment, they're giving you a gift. When somebody
Yeah.
says, like, you're beautiful, you're radiant, you're amazing, that shirt looks great, dude, I'm proud
Yeah.
of you. Like, the response should be to accept the gift and say thank you.
Totally. Receiving. That is something we all could use a lot of lessons in as a culture, that's for sure.
Oh, totally. I mean, people who are self confident are not economically exploitable. So we live in a
Yeah.
society that actively encourages us to have these psychopath, you know,
Totally.
psycho issues.
That's so true. You know what I was thinking about recently? Like, I mean, the lack of yang energy, right? The lack of masculine energy in our world these days
Young.
is big. And I realized, like, why is that, like, so, like, why is it so important? And I realized it's because dads or dad energy or masculine energy is like, it teaches kids self love because it teaches self reliance, it teaches risk taking, it teaches delayed gratification, it teaches, like, I'm worth things. And so few kids are getting those lessons these days. Meanwhile, on the mom side, on the female side, there's such a beautiful, like, lesson there in that love for humanity is what mom teaches. Like communication, collaboration, all of these great tools. But when you don't have the self love, then that humanity love, it just becomes martyrdom and like
Oh, totally.
victimhood.
Yeah, get off the cross. We
Yeah,
need to wood. Right? Like,
totally. Totally.
like it. But you're right. Like the. So I've been starting to say this whole, like, because I think one of the mistakes that Carl Jung, who coined the idea of, like, oh, your masculine side, your feminine side. I don't
Sure.
think I actually have a feminine side. I think what he called the feminine side was the nurturing part of me.
Totally. Love
and
it.
and I have a nurturing part. Like I love, like, it's funny because some of my in-laws have started to have small babies, and they always, like, I walk in and be like, "Hi, I'm not interested in you. Where's the baby?" Because I want to hold the little baby, and
Yeah.
I can put him to sleep, like, and I
Oh,
love doing it. So they can be
yeah.
colicky, and that's a nurturing part of me that I feel, like, really called into. That's not my
Yeah.
feminine side; it's my masculine side. It's
Love
my
it.
masculine nurturing energy.
Yeah.
And the core distinction, though, is that I'm going to nurture differently than a feminine person will.
Yep.
And I can think about this in terms of, like, martial arts. You know, my girls, they want to do jujitsu. Okay, cool. You're going to dedicate yourself for a year.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, I don't want to go anymore. And my wife's like, oh, let's talk about your feelings. I'm like, no. We had an agreement, and you need
Totally.
to be a person of your word to follow through with it. And so that
Yes.
is part of that nurturing, to be like, you should be a person of your word. There are boundaries you have to set with yourself. You need a solid core. And when somebody sits there and tells you to do something against that core, you can tell them how far up their ass they can stick it.
That
That's
is dad energy.
that's a
Yes.
lesson that is a nurturing and a kind and caring thing to say. I shouldn't yell
Mm,
at them. I shouldn't scream at them. I shouldn't punish them. But to
totally.
say, well, how dare you disrespect yourself,
Totally.
is a kind thing to teach somebody.
Ooh, that's beautiful. Dylan, that's such a great example. I think people really need to hear these types of things. And, like, for example, I would love to just, like, kind of shift into the other side of that. What does that look like on the feminine side? Because you just painted the beautiful picture of, like, what masculine energy and what masculine nurturing does for kids and how important it is to have that. And I mean, there's numerous headlines nowadays about how just, like, lacking in self-reliance these kids are now. So what you're describing is great. But on the other side, it's like, with balancing out what you just talked about, what does the feminine do, like, in a household? What does that yin energy do? And for example, it's like, oh, four different kids are coming over to play, and I'm like literally pulling this out, but I think it's a good example. And the like your wife or the feminine in the space has this like weird feeling about one of the kids, or just has like a bad gut feeling about something, like one of the kids might not be great to play with your other kid. So like even though they made an agreement, they are deciding now, like, hey, I have a feeling about something, I want to make some change, I want to make a change, I got to speak my truth right now because I see something that nobody else sees, and I'm going to speak it right now. And I think
Totally.
for the masculine in that situation, just be like, all right, my wife has a feeling about this, I'm going to fix it, we're going to listen to her in that moment. It's so different from what you just described. It's like two completely different places where one leads versus the other.
Yeah. The dynamics with my wife, one of the ways that we interact in this nurturing space is she serves as a governor.
Oh, tell me.
So I can't go over, like, for example, like, I'm not small, but in my family I am.
Okay.
So the women in my family are actually all taller than me.
Oh, wow.
And some of them are broader in the shoulders. So like I like when I introduced my wife to my family, I was like, don't be scared. I come from a big family. And she's like, oh, my mom was one of 17 kids and they all have herds. And I'm like, no. We're very large people.
You're so good. That's such a great
Like
punchline. I love
we're
it.
just like, my Aunt Maggie is very, she's very tall. She's very broad. She's very, and energetically she's very large. Like she's an amazing woman.
Yeah.
But my wife will come to, my daughter's like, my oldest is 10 and she's almost taller than my wife. like
Oh,
that's,
wow.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
she's totally got that side of the family. And so trying to talk to her about, like, one of the other dark sides of this is that, yes, you're going to be physically imposing and powerful, and we all struggle with health issues because if we don't eat appropriately.
Okay.
So trying to teach her how to eat. My wife serves as a counterbalance because to me it's just like, all right, let's just, here's a regimen, let's just stick to it. And she's
Right.
like, no, we actually have to have this, we have to introduce this, we have to nurture this emotional part. There's all this other thing. Let's talk about how we can avoid an eating disorder. Those are things she's calling the ball is what she's doing.
Yeah.
She's pointing out the things I'm not seeing because I'm too goal focused.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we can come together and be able to say, all right, now we have a clear understanding of where we want to be together, and now that gives her the ability to act independently and me the ability to act independently.
That's so beautiful. And I think, just to kind of sum this up in a way, I think that cultivating these types of skills happen in these like specific kind of exclusionary spaces initially. And then
Totally.
you're able to kind of connect with the opposite sex and be like, okay, cool. How do we bring these things together out of love, out of empathy, out of the acknowledgement and appreciation that like you can't do what I can do and I can't do what you can do. And like we've got to just like, I don't know, level set there. And I think that's something that our culture desperately needs right now.
Oh, totally. I mean, so much of our culture has, I think a lot of the things that are ailing us is a lack of communion between the different gifts of people.
Yeah.
And, so many women have been told, like, oh, you're put upon, you're not supposed to do this. And the response is be more like a guy, right? Have sex like a guy, have a career like a guy, interact with a guy, like, how to sleep with guys and not catch feels. Like these are not healthy things. And on the guy's side, we're told, step back and fade away. You don't have a purpose. In fact, you should be okay with not having a purpose, which is a great way to get a guy to start having suicidal thoughts. Right? Like this is the problem. So now when things are happening, for example, some of the backlash against the Dobbs case with abortion, I had women who came to me and were like, well, why aren't you stepping up? Why aren't you helping us with this? And my response was, I was told that I'm as needed as a fish needs a bicycle. I was told that my job was to step back and fade away, shut my mouth, and open my wallet. Go get him, Tiger. Like, I was told I don't get an opinion, and now suddenly what they're missing, like, and this is of course the problem. Like you had the Women's March, and nothing happened because there wasn't that masculine of like, let's go conquer the hill. Like they created a consensus. A lot of people showed up, but there was not the follow through. They're missing it.
Totally. Such a great just to be able to admit that and to just understand that it's masculine. The masculine is a better doer than the feminine.
My
And
wife
that's okay.
my wife has pointed this out. So when I first met her, I read a lot of feminist literature so I could have a
Okay.
conversation with her because
Okay.
she had dreadlocks and was
I
vegetarian and
love
all
it.
sorts of stuff.
How funny.
We were really recently talking, and one of the things she said to me was that she doesn't think there will ever be a female president to be elected right out of the gate, and her
Yeah.
reasoning is the U.S. political landscape is an adversarial warfare perspective. In that perspective, men are the ones who win. And I was like, well, what about all the women prime
Mm.
ministers? She's like, but in a parliamentary system, it's about consensus building. She's like, so of
Oh,
course they're going to be good at that.
so insightful.
And I like it's one of those things where like I want to I want to argue with her and be like, no, like you're
Yeah.
wrong, but I don't think she is.
Yeah. Oh my God, I can't wait to hang out with her one day. Oh, wow.
One day soon. But we are coming up on time.
Yeah.
So let's just, close out with like what's your biggest takeaway from this conversation?
My biggest takeaway from this conversation is that we deep down know like what's true for us as men and as women. Like if we close our eyes, like all the blue screens, like let them be gone and just like connect with ourselves and ask ourselves like what is true for me? What do I desire deeply? What do I want from, with the opposite sex? We know the answers. And so if we're willing to be brave enough to let them out and speak true, I think we'll find our way in life. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
How about you?
I think my biggest takeaway, the thing that I'm really leaving here with is just kind of a reconfirmation of North Stars are really important. And the true deep knowing of the feminine is the best North Star for a man.
Ugh, my heart.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening. You can find us on YouTube as well if you'd like to see the actual like visual representation of this and all the funny faces we make during this this recording. Until next time, thank you so much for listening, and
Bye, y'all.
have a good day.